I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm speaking with Nanfu Wang, the director of the documentary In the Same Breath, which is currently streaming on HBO Max. Nanfu, the first question I wanted to ask is, how is your family in China doing now that we're coming up on 2 years since the discovery of the first cases of this novel coronavirus?
My family is doing good. My mom lives in a village that's about 300 miles away from Wuhan, but it's about 2,000 people village. So luckily, since the outbreak started in January 2020, there wasn't any positive COVID cases in my village. Although, on the other hand, since the film's release in August on HBO, my family and my mom, my closest family members, have been confronted and interrogated by the government because of me making this film.
I was just, and I understand you can feel free to, if you're not able to or you don't want to, but could you go into a bit more detail about what you mean by, because I think some people may not be able to grasp what it means to be interrogated by, a law enforcement arm of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, it's usually a form of intimidation and a form of a threat. And it happened whenever I was making a film in China. So when I was making Hooligans Fair, my first film, that was the first time when my mom and my uncle, my father passed away, so my uncle is like my dad. They got a phone call from national security agents, and basically it's like, what is Nanfu doing? And we know everything. And similar things happened after One Child Nation. A few police officers, 3 of them, went to visit my mom and questioned her for 5 hours. And this one was the most serious because 3 of my family members in different places were taken into the police station. And my brother was questioned in 2 days, like 2 days in a row, each day for many hours. And this one is the most, the threat was the most severe. In the past, they usually wanted to know where was the funding come from, who's supporting this film, to make sure that whether this is just a film or is it anti-government related, or is more of organization in a way. This one, the threats were, if I were ever to make a film about China again, they would arrest my brother and my uncle, it was scary this time to me.
So going back 2 years now, how did you come to make this documentary about the COVID-19 pandemic and the way it was treated in both China and the US?
I was visiting my mom in January 2020. And when I flew back to China, everything seemed normal. There was no COVID, no outbreak, although there were rumors about a pneumonia. And at the time, the government had punished people, whoever was talking about this pneumonia. And it seems to be just a rumor at the time. Very few people paid attention to it. And by January 23rd, I flew back to the US, and that was when Wuhan went into lockdown. But my son was with my mom. So the initial few days was me trying to figure out whether my mom or my son, who was 2 years old, would be safe being so close to Wuhan, and whether the virus was more severe, more contagious than the government had said. So I started gathering information and talking to people in Wuhan, trying to figure out if I needed to do anything for my family. And it was during those few days of gathering information, I realized that what the government had been telling people and had been telling the world was not the same as the reality. So immediately we managed to get my son out of China, and I started making the film very soon, just because I felt at the time I didn't know the outbreak would eventually extend and spread it across the whole world. At the time, I thought I was making the film to expose the cover up and the misinformation in China and the propaganda. But quickly by March, it spread to the US. And that was the shocking moment to see how the US repeated some of the similar mistakes in terms of government's lack of transparency and misinformation. So the film eventually explores how information was shaped by governments and how governments prioritize preserving this image over public safety.
So there's so much interesting ground that's covered in the film. Actually, before I ask that question, how long was it before before your son was able to get back into the U.S.?
How long was I away in China?
Or how long was it until, because you said you came back first?
Yeah, I came back 2 days later, and it was crazy 2 days, 40 hours, because I landed in San Francisco. Wuhan went into lockdown, and I was shocked when I went through San Francisco, the customs. I thought, I just came back from China. They must have screening me, or it was complete normal. No temperature screening, no question asked. I went through, and me and my husband talked about China's situation, and 1 second would be like, this is horrible, like we should go get them. And then we would buy flight tickets, round trip to China and back. And then the next minute, I was like, no, we're overreacting. It is contained. Why don't we just like keep our original plan to pick them up in a week or two? And then the next minute would be like, no, we discovered more information. It was actually, so we went back and forth and constantly on the phone with United Airlines and canceling the tickets, rebooking the tickets. It was crazy. We felt paranoid at the time, and we felt like as parents didn't know what to do. But yeah, later I felt a lot of people might have experienced similar emotions.
And it was, did your son come back in like at the time that he was normally supposed to?
No, we went pick him up. My husband flew, it was less than 36 hours, literally flew, landed, pick him up, go back to the plane. It was the craziest trip. We were, thankful that we came back, because shortly the border was completely closed.
So there's so much interesting ground covered in the film, including some of the structural similarities in how the situation around COVID was framed. And I was curious as to whether there was a specific similarity between how it was handled in China and how it was handled in the US that you felt was particularly eerie or haunting.
At the very beginning, I think in China, seeing how strict the lockdown was, I'm sure like at the same time, the whole world seeing it and then felt, wow, this was really possible and or necessary. And I think that there was an initial shock. And then what to me became more eerie and hard to make sense was in the US when, and later now we all know and we all see the debate over, not even debate that such a huge amount of people believing COVID doesn't exist, or refusing to believe it, and that became more eerie than seeing the initial lockdown in China. It's about how people's perspective and why people believe what they believe.
Piggybacking off of that, I was wondering if you could speak to some of the contrasts that you saw and that you show in the film of how, there was so much heavy censorship in China, but in the US, it was almost the complete opposite. Yet the consequences were both equally devastating and horrific. And I was wondering if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because China and the US, people would think that these are two composing political system, and their measures towards COVID almost seem like on the two end of the the spectrums of how government responds, and yet as a person who grew up there, and lived here for the past 10 years, it struck me as how similar the two different systems handled the pandemic, and both have to do with um, there was just no lack of transparency from early on. In China, you see 8 doctors were punished for quote unquote spreading rumors. And in the US in March, early on, and there were a lot of doctors and nurses being fired, being let go because they asked questions about the protocols. They asked questions about the policy, COVID policy, and the testing procedure, and the information that they got were conflicting, and those people were, were either asked to resign or completely fired. So that's just one example. To me, it's less about contrasting, but it's really like seeing the eerie similarities between the different political systems and how leaders and governments have made similar mistakes.
So I know your film primarily addresses China and the US, but I was curious, did you look at any other countries like in Europe, for example? And did you find that that those countries had any similarities in how they handled the pandemic, or yeah, any similarities in how they handled it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the film focuses on China and the US, and yet to me, it's not a film about tracking how COVID was in the US or in China, or how the virus spread it exactly. It's more of using, looking through the lens of the pandemic, through the lens of COVID, and seeing through this political issues, societal issues exist in different countries. And I think while the two countries are on the too far end of the spectrums, there are a lot of countries falling in between. And we have seen, how similar issues or mistakes that have made in the UK, in Spain, in a lot of countries where officials oftentimes at the beginning didn't disclose all the information that they know, and almost trying to shape a narrative of a positive response. And the other thing that is similar is in the film that it touched upon the competition between the US and China, almost taking advantage of the other country's situation and turn it into propaganda tool by saying our country is better than the other country, and there is a country that does worse. And as if by deflecting the problem that they can avoid accountability and examination in its own. And I think that happens on a global level too. Countries are pointing fingers, countries turning it into a competition.
And I think one of the other striking things about this is the way is the footage that the camera crew that was operating in the hospitals was able to gather. I'm curious as to how you were able to direct that camera crew that was operating without you in China, and also was it difficult to get that footage, especially the footage of the hospitals, out of China?
So the second question actually is not, because in China, during that time, anybody who gained access to go to the hospital already has like a credential. So they can go in and out of the hospital freely and without, being examined what kind of footage they have, because they were already pre-approved for going. And in terms of communication and remote directing, is new, and I realized very quickly how liberating it was, because we started with one cinematographer, and then we quickly realized things were happening really fast. We have one cinematographer at the hospital, we need another person following the ambulance, we needed another person to go to the patient's home, we need another person to follow a journalist or an activist. So simultaneously, all of these things were happening, and we end up having more than 10 cinematographers in China and more than 10 in the US going to different states. And a small amount of those cinematographers, over 20 of them that I knew and had a relationship before. So those kind of communication is easier because we can pick up the phone and chat. And the majority of them I didn't know before. So it's building the trust. In addition to building the trust with the subject, it takes time, and the direction usually is phone call and then sending them very specific visual references. And once they send the footage back, and almost every night, every day, the footage is uploaded to a system that we built. So it's not shipping the drives, but it's uploading to a system that I could see the footage within a few hours after they shot, and then giving additional direction of how to film the next day, the next scenes.
Well, Nanfu, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best over this upcoming awards season. And to all of our viewers, please like this video, smash that subscribe button, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks so much.
Thank you.